Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to the Lepanto Institute's Anchor Team. I'm your host, Michael Hitchborn, and joining me this evening is the ever lovely and much more intelligent than I am, Alyssa Hitchborn. And there's the eye roll. um, we have a pretty big show for you this evening. We're going to be talking about things that are going on related to the shooting that took place. We'll say an extra Ave this evening for the victims of that shooting. And we've got some other topics that we want to cover related to things going on with the Vatican on an international stage. But before we get into any of that, we're going to start, as we always do, with our opening prayer. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
And another Ave for those victims of the shooting in Texas. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Our Lady of Victory.
Pray for us.
In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
We have a German Shepherd joining our show.
Yeah, oh boy. Well, at least her name is Rosie. So, Holy Redeemer says that you have a better green screen than I have. So there we go. It's not a green screen. That's actually part of our prayer room, which is so we've got our crucifix back there. You can see the crucifix. There are a couple of other accoutrements up there, but no, that's our prayer room.
Oh, let me do wrong way. There you go. Oh, you want to show them the cross?
Yeah, sure. Go right ahead.
There you go.
There we are. The cross and the Sacred Heart you can see hanging up there.
Okay.
So there we go. Okay, so I want to give kind of a brief update on how things are going here at the Lepanto Institute. Our team has been working very hard on building the framework for the various projects that we're working on. I know I hinted at it in the latest fundraising appeal that I put out. I can't really say what we're working on because it actually involves some undercover work. That much I can say. So I can't reveal too much more because with the undercover work, it could blow their cover, and we can't have that. So I can just tell you we've got some pretty big things coming. So it's going to be interesting to see how that turns out. One of the projects that you know that we're working on is the constant CCHD research. We are now up over 100 organizations researched. We have about 100 left to go. So we're about 50% of the way there, which is great news because, wow, this is a big slog. And one last thing, a final note, from June the 3rd through June 10th, so for 2 weeks, the Anchor Team is going to have to be done probably either pre-recorded or remotely, depending upon what we can do. I don't know what our internet situation is going to be, but we are going to be on a family vacation, first one in quite some time. And because of that, I may or may not be available. So we'll see what happens throughout the course of the week. If I have time to do a pre-record, I'll do a pre-record, upload it, and then you guys can talk as you're watching the program, as you tend to in the little chat room there. Or if I can get away and if I actually have an internet connection strong enough, I'll try to do the show remotely. We'll see what happens, but I'm just giving you a heads up. That's where we are. Now, getting into tonight's program, Alyssa and I have been talking quite a bit about the issue with the recent shooting, the one down in Texas. There are a couple of things that came out in social media, and I do warn about what you read or what you see in social media, because a lot of times early reports, people get things that, yeah, it's very true. Holy Redeemer says I can't go undercover. I have to glue a mustache on and wear sunglasses. Yeah, it's very true. I could wear glasses. It worked for Superman, right? But the thing about false reports coming out with regard to um, the shooting, we heard that the shooter was a transgender. That turns out to be an unconfirmed assertion. The pictures that were being posted actually came from somebody else's Facebook page. They weren't the shooter's Facebook page. So the claim that the shooter was a transgender was predicated on a similar looking individual having those pictures put up in comparison to the official released police photos of the shooter, and it created a narrative that the shooter was a transgender, and so therefore there's a problem. Now, absolutely, there's a problem. Is definitely a mental illness issue with somebody who is doing the shooting, possibly being transgender. That definitely speaks to a problem. But we don't know that the guy was actually transgender. There's also a narrative that he was an illegal alien. That's not true. So that narrative collapsed. And then there are all sorts of statements that this was MK Ultra mind control programming to try and get somebody to go, unsubstantiated. Maybe it's true. Maybe he was the victim of some sort of government plot to create a lone gun assassin. You see certain things happen with these individuals that seem to have markers of somebody who was involved in something that was programming their mind. But there's no proof. There's not even any evidence that this was some sort of government plot. So we have to stay away from these kinds of narratives and follow what is really taking place. So, for instance, you've got the issue of the AR-15s. Some people are saying that, it's so easy for people to get AR-15s. Well, yes, that's true in Texas because they have the most permissive laws in the United States. But those AR-15s were $2,000 each.
Yeah.
They both had $750 tactical lights on them. He had 660 rounds of ammunition, which would have cost $558. All told, he also had a tac vest on. It's one of those, what do they call it? Plate armor vests to stop bullets, but he didn't have any of the plate armor. But you add up the tally there, he's got about $6,000 worth of gear. Where did he get that money?
And where does a high school graduate who works at Wendy's, where does he go to acquire all this extra stuff? The internet, but like you said, how does he finance it? They said his mother was a drug addict. I mean, just where his father's not in the picture, or where is he getting the money to get these things? So that's actually a very serious question that we need to be asking. How easy really was it for him to get that gear? If it all cost $6,000 and he's got an entry level part-time job working at Wendy's, chances are he doesn't have $6,000 to rub together. So where did he get the money? Somebody must have helped him. He also had a very expensive Ford F-150 that he was driving around. Where did that come from? So somebody is financing him. All right. Somebody is behind the money to where he's getting these things. His sense of entitlement seems maybe to have come from the fact that he has a broken home and a drug-addicted mother. Maybe that played a role. I don't know. The fact that he shot his grandmother in the head is very odd. Apparently that had something to do with her wanting to reduce his access to his cell phone. So it's definitely a family issue, though. There seems to be something mentally going on with this kid. What do you think? I would say so. I think it follows a similar pattern you saw with maybe even some other school shootings where you don't have a father in the picture. You have a boy who grows up in a culture that hates masculinity, who over time starts to just sort of withdraw from engaging with his peers. They said that's what happened, that he was bullied in middle school, and that after that he just kind of disengaged, and the cops came out to his mother's house a lot. He and his mother had some knockdown, drag out fights. Just there's no future for somebody like him. Where do you go with that? There's no one to guide you. And
So clearly somebody else started guiding him toward the wrong things. And I think that probably bears out with some of these other shooting cases as well, that it's a disaffected young man who's not engaging with society anymore.
I know that I had this lower on in my uh, in my notes for this evening, but I kind of want to jump to this real quick. A friend of mine, Brian Kemper, he's a pro-life activist. I knew him from my days at American Life League. He posted this on Facebook, and I think that it actually speaks to something that needs to be discussed. He said, "I know my conservative friends will not like this, but I am sick of reading about these damn shootings. Yes, I believe in the Second Amendment, but something has to be done. We are in a violent culture of death, and it must change. There are no simple answers that will just fix it all. Yes, the world needs Jesus. We also need to learn to stop hating those we are different from or whom we disagree with or don't share a faith with." I'm not agreeing with everything he's saying, by the way. I think it's interesting. "I know it's people who kill people, but guns don't need to be so prevalent or easy to get. We also need comprehensive medical health care so badly, I want to vomit right now." So all of this right here, coming from a pro-life activist, it carries the weight of the pro-life movement behind what he's saying. And he's saying, look, I agree with the Second Amendment rights. There also should be something to do with combating hatred. Agreed. And he said that we need health care, mental health care policies or plans or something to help people with mental health issues. I think what he's trying to say is that we have a double sickness in our society. It's a sickness in mental health, and it's a sickness in the soul. On the one hand, yes, we are so imbued with the culture of death that we no longer see the value of people, the value of human life. It's not fully visible. And why is it not fully visible? Because we don't even value children. Where are his siblings? How come he doesn't have siblings? Okay, a child without siblings can tend to be rather lonely, don't you think?
Yes. I'm trying to remember if the quote we're saying that he got bullied in middle school, if that was from a cousin. It was definitely from some family member who talked about that. There was even something, I think she said that he wore eyeliner once and got mocked for that. So that might feed into that trans, conspiracy about him. But
Right.
You're right. Like the family seems to certainly be broken and dysfunctional. And I think that is hugely what the problem is in society. It's not the guns again. It's the broken families and the lack of fathers, frankly, especially for the young men.
Absolutely. Well, and so that's just the foundational work. The next step is that there has to be a spiritual guidance, an understanding that all of us individually in this world are headed in one direction or another. And those two directions are the ultimate eternal ends, the destiny of our souls. And without that guidance and without that, even that basic understanding, well, it's very easy to cheapen human life, because then it's just a matter of what we can do in this world with whomever we want. Don't you think that really plays into it too, that the spiritual sickness feeds that selfish mentality?
Yes, and I think that there's also an underlying, very almost I would say satanic kind of undertone as well, that these shootings seem to frequently be directed at innocent children. Like there's this hatred for innocence certainly from the devil that comes out in the sin of abortion, the child pornography, and I think in these school shootings as well, where he goes into a fourth grade classroom to shoot up a bunch of 9 and 10-year-olds. I mean, my gosh, like what could those kids possibly have ever done to him? It's not even about that. It's about their innocence. I think that plays a big factor.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, you think about why he targeted children, which seems to be the thing. It's, whenever these mass shooters, they always look for the youngest and most vulnerable among us to go after, which is a symptom of bullying kind of passing on the punch. Somebody slaps the guy next to him, who slaps the guy next to him, and on and on and on.
I want to switch gears just a moment to another aspect of this whole thing, because when we're talking about the conspiracy theories that are wrapped up in this, the ones that the MSM wants to point to and say, oh, this is just right-wing misinformation and they don't know what they're talking about, and this is why we need gun control now. But there's another narrative that the MSM is kind of ignoring. And that is the fact that the police waited 45 minutes in the school hallway before breaching to take out Ramos. One of the reports that I read said that sporadic gunfire was heard throughout that time, and it is unknown how many children were killed during that period. So the question is, why on earth would the police wait?
There's also, I think I read a report too that said that there was an exchange of gunfire outside the building. And then the guy goes in through the open door, which is in itself very, very strange.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a school in a border town. They said that this school routinely gets locked down once a week because there are trains that will come through where illegals will jump off and they have to lock the school down. The school has its own police force because it's on a border town. How is this school that's obviously knows its business? How did this kid just waltz right in?
So it's not like they were unpracticed in being able to deal with this.
Correct. Yes. If you have to lock down a school because you got an issue of, border agents chasing illegals through your town, then why was it so hard for them to just deal with this? They said, oh, we have to wait for the police, I guess, for saying they were waiting for the SWAT unit to come, but to just stand there.
Well, and then that also begs the question, how did the guy even get into the school?
They said the door was open, just unlocked, which seems to go against pretty much all school policies.
Absolutely.
In the wake of all these other school shootings, that the doors are always locked. You have to be buzzed in or have to have some kind of ID or whatever, usually to even get into the building.
Right. They're usually
or be escorted in. How did he just walk in the building?
I remember when I was in grade school up in Northern Virginia, and in the military school that I went to, there were multiple entrances in the school, and this is back in the 80s. And once all the kids were in the school, the outer doors locked. If you went outside, you were locked out. You couldn't get back in unless you were spotted by somebody. I remember that because there was a kid that went outside, unauthorized, went outside and he couldn't get back in, and he had to be let in by somebody from the administration. He got a good chewing out for that. So that was back in the 80s. And again, there were multiple entrances, both front and back of the building, to be able to get in and out. But, and I also remember during recess, the teacher had to do something to prop the door or to unlock the door so that when we went out to recess, we could get back in. But once we were all back in, that door locked. And I remember watching the teacher with the key locking the door. So there are all sorts of oddities about this situation. The police waited 45 minutes in the hallway, near where the shootings were taking place. They heard sporadic gunfire throughout the whole thing. And then you hear about the door being unlocked. That's how he got in. There were all sorts of oddities about not locking down the building and not, all of this seems to me to be a bit too coincidental. I don't know if I'm reading too much into this. What do you think?
It's hard to say. Obviously, we don't have the full story, of course, but it does seem unconscionable that where children are concerned, that there would be grown adults hesitating, right, to rush into danger, on behalf of children. I understand there's some protocol, and I can also understand why they restrain the parents, right? You don't want a crowd of parents running through a hallway with gunfire being exchanged. You'd have a bloodbath. But to just not act when children were being hurt, that boggles the mind. What was going through their heads? If they were waiting for orders, I would have been forget that. We're going in there. These kids are dying. We're not stupid. We have some training. We can handle this.
Right.
Until the professionals show up or whatever. But it seems unconscionable that they should have waited so long, waiting for border control or whoever they were waiting for to come. I'm not even sure. Yeah,
it didn't quite make a whole lot of sense to me what they were waiting for, why they hesitated.
one of the stories that I read said that there was a child inside the school texting 911 saying, please send the police in now. And even then, they still waited.
Yeah.
Of course, all of this leads to the rabid liberal calls for gun control. They're all falling all over themselves, frothing at the mouth, saying that, well, this just proves it. We need to make sure that nobody over the age of 21 is able to purchase a weapon or a firearm of any kind. We need to get all these scary AR-15s out of the public hands and make sure that they stay in the hands of the authorities where they belong, and on and on and on. Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar had some things to say, and you were watching some of that and had some thoughts.
Yeah. So Whoopi Goldberg opens with, if I hear one more Republican senator say their heart's breaking and, prayers for the victims and their families, she said, I'm going to punch somebody. Thus, like, showing her contempt for the idea that prayer is some form of just inaction, right? Like not doing anything, a sentimental word uttered without any kind of impact. And then going on to, demand, that there be some sort of gun control laws in place. Joy stepped it up a notch by making the assertion that, we're the only country where this happens. So clearly it's not, it's not mental health. It's not this. There's something, it's our gun laws that are the problem. That's the denominator, the variable that is in play here. Completely, of course, disregarding the fact that there's gun violence worldwide, including mass shootings in many countries. I mean, I'm not even sure where she was going with that, except to, strengthen her narrative that it's our gun laws that are problematic and need to be changed. But I mean, as has been shown many times, I mean, you can't violate the Second Amendment of the Constitution. It's very clear.
Yep.
I don't know why placing an arbitrary age limit on it is going to change the fact that the Constitution is very clear on this point. So that's why their game is to talk about saying, well, fine, you can have guns, but you can only buy so many rounds of ammunition, or you can only buy certain types of guns. See, we're not abridging your right to bear arms, just to bear certain arms. And that's kind of their narrative right now, is they know they can't outrightly defy the Second Amendment, so they got to go around it by like chipping away at it, piecemeal. And using tragedies like this, frankly, it's disgusting. They use it as a political way. Like, was it Beto O'Rourke, busting in on Governor Abbott's press conference to scream at him about gun violence? It's like totally tasteless. Just, they know they're going to get slaughtered in November, and this is their way of trying to find some issue, some platform to rally their base, to appeal to the center. I mean, it's just disgusting what they do.
Well, and Barack Obama, he came out and said, we should take this opportunity to remember the sacrifice made by George Floyd a year ago or 2 years ago. And I'm sitting there thinking, sacrifice? No, that wasn't a sacrifice. And to turn this into a George Floyd memorial is vile.
Yeah, I mean, the cases are like, right? Like, what were we just talking about? That police inaction is one of the complaints in this particular shooting. Whereas people would have said with the Floyd killing that it was, the police brutality that caused him, to go down. So right. What is he even? That's such a non sequitur comparison. Like, two people die in completely different circumstances. Why even compare them?
Well, mostly I think because what they're trying to do is keep the narrative away from just the tragedy of it and trying to get down to the heart of the illness of the individual who committed the crime and keep it on the issue of guns. They don't want to talk about the guy who shot these kids. They don't want to talk about the issues that he had. They don't want to talk about any of that. They want to talk about the fact that guns are killing people or people with guns are killing people. And I think that that's really the only narrative that they want. They want to eliminate all the other aspects and just keep people in an emotional low about this so that they can continue to push their ideology. I wrote on Twitter, and it actually has gotten a lot of attention. I posted this on Facebook also. I said, a society that targets children in the womb will target them anywhere. And I think that that's really what we need to understand is at the heart of this whole thing, is that we don't even defend the most defenseless among us. What do we expect? You know?
Absolutely. I mean, if you have no respect for human dignity in its most innocent form, why should you have respect for it anywhere?
Of course, in the midst of all of this, the bishops who had very little to say about overturning Roe v. Wade, about making sure that the Eucharist is being properly respected by being withheld from individuals who are obstinately persevering in the support of abortion, such as Nancy Pelosi. But wow, are they falling all over themselves in order to come out and virtue signal about the gun violence? Bishop Daniel E. Flores from Brownsville, Texas, he tweeted this on May 25th. "Don't tell me that guns are the problem. People are. I'm sick of hearing it. The darkness first takes our children, who then kill our children, using the guns that are easier to obtain than aspirin. We sacralize death's instruments and then are surprised that death uses them." His focus is not entirely on the right spot, don't you think?
No, I mean, it seems strange that he would just completely overlook, again, all those things we've already talked about, right? The father issue, like the lack of fathers, the lack of respect for life in our country, like completely gloss over that. I mean, this was a horrifying tragedy, but how many people are actually surprised by these kinds of things happening? In a society that, has such little value for people, like in some respects, right? Again, the abortion issue coming out there, pornography, sorry, that's a huge one. There's a lack of, respect for people's dignity. The porn industry is huge. So with those things, like, why would he come at it from that angle? Like guns are easier to obtain than aspirin, really?
Yeah.
I'm not really sure about that. Again, you kind of get where they're going with their emotions on the subject, but the logic doesn't really follow. Like, where are we going with that? Like, what is it that he wants us to, what conclusion does he want us to draw? Like, guns bad, get rid of them? I mean, where's he going with that statement?
I think that's exactly where he's going with that. And again, turning to social media, I said in 2019, there were 352,000 children that were murdered by curettes. And in 2019, there were 992 children that were killed with guns, murdered with guns. I'm wondering when they're going to start talking about the need to ban curettes. Because at the end of the day, you start looking at what they're talking about, and they are blaming the instrument of the murder instead of the murderer and the sickness behind them, the spiritual and mental sickness. You mentioned the pornography, the fatherlessness, the broken homes. The fact that people are becoming more and more self-absorbed is not only a mental illness. It's not just a mental problem, but it's a spiritual problem that breeds selfishness to the point that the individual really doesn't feel a sense of anything, has a total disconnect from society and from other individuals, even people he might have called family members or friends. And so where does he go? As you pointed out, what's his recourse? What's his future? And
right. And there's definitely this like attempt to guilt people, right, who might hold a different viewpoint. I mean, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, well, you're not pro-life. She's like, don't even talk about being pro-life unless you're pro, gun control. As if now she, of all people, can start defining what the pro-life position is. But isn't that a little bit what the bishop's doing? Like, the pro-life position, it's a seamless garment, right? It has to include gun control and all these other things, or you're not really pro-life. It's like, wait a minute, no, hold on a second. You're redefining what it means to be pro-life. And then thus guilting people into a position where they can't hold a logical position of defending the Second Amendment without sounding like, horrifically out of touch, terrible people. I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of all they've got, right? It's the emotional appeal. Like, look at everybody who died. That's terrible. Everybody agrees. But if you're somehow for the Second Amendment, then you're a heartless human being who's not pro-life,
Yeah.
right? We're going to guilt you, we're going to gaslight you and say you're not pro-life if you're not pro-gun control.
Well, that's you're right. It's the seamless garment argument, and they also tack on things like the death penalty, and they tack on all sorts of other things like the environment, and say that, well, you have to be for all of our other issues if you're going to be able to call yourself pro-life. The pro-life movement started because of abortion, and it was pro-lifers who were vehemently supporting women who were in a crisis pregnancy. They were giving them diapers, offering to adopt their children, making all sorts of means possible to take care of and support these women, not just through their pregnancy, but also after the baby is born. You and I are regular donors to Mary's Shelter here in Fredericksburg, Virginia, where they take in women in a home.
And they house them for months, like sometimes years, if that's what they need. And they take in their other children too, not just the baby.
And they also they put them in education programs. They help them to finish their high school diploma. They help them to learn a trade so that they can take care of their family. The success stories out of there are amazing. So when the culture of death camp comes out and says, well, you're not pro-life if ... they're absolutely discounting everything that we do.
Right, because everybody, envious people always have a secret desire to find hypocrisy in people whose positions they dislike.
Yep.
So if I dislike you and I suspect that you're being a hypocrite about the life issue because of the gun control, for example, then I'm going to point that out and dance around it and crow about it as if those people were actually pro-life. Like, they're not. I mean, you're talking about the party that supports baby murder, pretty much up to birth, and some of them beyond birth.
Right.
So who are they to stand up and act like they're on some kind of ivory tower to sit there and, shake their fingers that you're not pro-life because you're not for our, politically motivated gun control laws.
Catholic News Service had an article where they highlighted several other bishops who had come out and made statements. And I thought this one from Cardinal Blaise Cupich was very telling. And I say it's telling. I actually went through his Facebook page to see how many times he had mentioned either Roe v. Wade or abortion. I found exactly one tweet. One in, I think, 7 years worth of tweeting on Twitter. One tweet on abortion or Roe v. Wade. But when I looked up what he says about gun stuff, he's got dozens of tweets. And on May 24th, he said the right to life trumps the right to have weapons, and that the Second Amendment did not come down from Sinai. What a line. The Second Amendment did not, as if
the pro-life, or I'm sorry, the pro Second Amendment side is somehow equating the Second Amendment with the Bible or with the Ten Commandments. I mean, that's just foolishness. We're comparing, apples and oranges here. It's a total non sequitur. Let me just bring that in to once again mock and point out some kind of hypocrisy, in people whose viewpoints I dislike and want to tear down in some way.
He goes on, he says, the right to bear arms will never be more important than human life, he said. Our children have rights too. Really? Okay, so Your Excellency, when are you going to start talking about abortion then? And our elected officials have a moral duty to protect them. Yes. So start talking about knocking down Roe v. Wade. Start talking about enacting pro-life legislation and making abortion a crime. But he doesn't say any of that. No, this is all about guns. He says, we must weep and soak in the grief that comes with the knowledge that these children of God were cut down by a man who was just a few years their senior. Then we must steel ourselves to act in the face of what seems like insurmountable despair, he tweeted. As I reflect on this latest American massacre, I keep returning to the questions. Who are we as a nation if we do not act to protect our children? What do we love more, our instruments of death or our future? Your Eminence, when are you going to start talking about Planned Parenthood, the number one industrial big box retail sale of abortion and contraception?
Or when is His Eminence going to come out and support Archbishop Cordileone in cutting off Nancy Pelosi from receiving communion, like a baby supporting, a baby murder supporting politician? Where is he? Why isn't he a major voice in saying this needs to stop because our children are more important than our convenience, the things we want to do?
So he means gun control, but he uses all of the language that we use in the pro-life movement. It's a sick, twisted variation on what we pro-lifers actually are professing and talking about and trying to enact. And he's focusing only on gun violence, which we are interested in too, by the way. We are interested in stopping gun violence. I'm in favor of having guards at high schools and grade schools. I'm in favor of training and arming teachers so that they know how to use and carry a firearm. I have no problem with that. But they don't want to talk about that because they think the problem is the guns, not the people behind them. That's really at the heart of this issue. It's a big non sequitur. So, one other thing I want to bring up, because it's going to transition into our next topic. Pope Francis had something to say about this too. Did you hear this?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, Pope Francis from Rome. Pope Francis also weighed in saying, quote, "It's time to say enough. The indiscriminate trade of weapons, and encourage all to be committed in the effort so that tragedies like this cannot occur." So he also wants to get involved in hampering gun trade and hampering the right to bear arms. And I think that his motivation behind this is so that the Vatican can help the United Nations and the World Economic Forum usher in this great big new world order. Don't you think?
I mean, it certainly seems to sound like it. There's nothing a globalist hates more than people who can resist them. So, yeah, creating a narrative wherein people willingly surrender, the right to arm themselves, or by criminalizing their behavior, almost in the court of public opinion, looking upon them as selfish because they care more about guns than kids, as Cupich said, right?
Yep.
That certainly seems to kind of bleed into this idea of a new world order where, the sane people, right, the people who have all the good ideas are in charge, and they're keeping a lid on the crackpots out there, making sure they're not, going off and shooting up schools, etc. That we need to have people who have our best interests at heart in charge of things. And certainly this is not new coming from the Vatican. We were talking earlier about Paul VI in, was it Populorum Progressio, 1967, saying, of course we need to have some kind of world governing body that can take care of things on the juridical and political planes, wholeheartedly in support of, the creation of the UN, etc. Now, of course, we don't know exactly what was in the Pope's mind, right, when he was saying all this. Like, he could have just been thinking, a collaborative body. But it's pretty clear that the popes have... Sometimes their economics allow their concept of economics allows them to be a pawn. That would be the kind way of putting it, right? Other times it seems like they're enthusiastic, partners in the project, not just pawns, but partners.
So I discovered when I was at American Life League a document that was put together by Caritas Internationalis, and they did this in conjunction with another organization called CIDSE. And I haven't quite gone into an expose of this particular document yet, because weighing through it is kind of, there are a lot of couched terms in there but if you read between the lines, you can pretty much figure out exactly what they're trying to say. The title of the document is An Introduction to Global Governance through the lens of Catholic social teaching. And the contents, the light of faith as a lens to see the world, and the key principles of Catholic social teaching and global governance. Entry point, the principles that should serve as the basis for discussions of global governance. Process, the principles that should guide the process of global governance, and then the principles that must be taken into consideration when proposing changes to global governance structures, and then their vision for the future, the principles of Catholic social teaching that underline the vision of humanity's future. This document, it was written in 2007. And it was right around the time that the Vatican was starting to get involved, not the Vatican per se, but Caritas Internationalis and some of the international aid and development agencies. They were pushing what were called the Millennium Development Goals at that time. Then in 2015, the Millennium Development Goals became the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, let's be clear. All of these goals are thoroughly communist. They are absolutely communist. We did a whole article on this a couple of years ago showing that line by line, each of these goals fits in with the communist agenda. There's no doubt about it. And, this Catholic social teaching aspect, they want to say, well, we have to follow the principles of subsidiarity and all this stuff. But how can you have global governance and subsidiarity at the same time? That's what I would like to know.
Well, it's almost like they're just trying to just baptize Marxism, right?
Right.
It's not really bad. See, when we do it, it's social justice. It's for the good of humanity, etc. It's like, no, it's still Marxism.
Yeah.
It's still you have to be. I think that's something that the church has gotten wrong so many times is really economics. Like, again, a concern for the poor is legitimately a worthwhile thing for the church to concern herself with, but going about addressing what causes poverty and how to relieve it with a Marxist understanding of economics has just been disastrous for the church, ever since the 60s with liberation theology. I think that's really one of the biggest problems is they've bought into this idea that they kind of stop short of outright, communism, like collectivization. They stop. Let's not go up to that line, but everything up there, like they're all supportive of it. And it's like, they're just trying to baptize the Marxism, and it doesn't work.
No, of course not.
It doesn't work. If your economics are bad, your concern for the poor is not going to be handled properly.
Well, it's a lot like a couple in couples therapy, right? If you're talking about the relationship, you're not actually having a relationship. So if you're looking at the economic issues, and instead of understanding the purpose of charity, that is that the relationship between the one dispensing the charitable goods, the alms, and the one receiving the alms, that the relationship there is really what you're trying to establish and what you're trying to foster, because that's where virtue grows. Instead, you're looking at simply addressing the needs of the belly. And if you're doing that, if you're just looking at the belly and saying, well, we have this vast amount of need, so we need to raise X number of dollars, you've taken the humanity out of it. You've taken the relationship out of it. It's no longer about the generosity of the gift being given and the appreciation of the gift received. It's now, well, this is a structure that we're going to implement. It's now a bureaucratic process, and it's an industry that we are going to use in order to try and undo all of the issues of poverty so we can create a world utopia. And I think that you're right, that the reason that the church, or many in the church, get economics so wrong is because they're focused on the wrong thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And they ignore the fact that it's okay. So sure, just filling a belly is only going, that's only going to go so far, right? Like that's not enough, fair enough. But it's almost like we've graduated from belly filling to, agitation, like,
Right.
like social justice agitation on the issue, which again, completely misses the point of of creating, laws and structures in society wherein people can be self-sufficient, where they can, make the money to buy their own bread. They're not looking for a handout, even though that could be charitably received until they're on their feet. But the goal is for them to have the dignity of making their own money. And this is constantly squashed, especially in third world countries, Latin America. The economist Hernando de Soto wrote extensively on this. His experience with corruption in Central and South American countries is that there are people there that want to work. They want to provide for their families, but they are consistently stymied at every turn by government corruption. That's a big one. But again, I would add misunderstood economics and how to apply them is probably another. Like, telling people to agitate is not going to set them free or preserve their dignity in any way.
Well, and from a spiritual perspective, what you're doing is you're fostering a spirit of anger and a spirit of envy. And you're doing it in such a way that it builds a vice in the individual, and it not only builds a vice and causes a disjointed or a fractured society, but it fosters an attack on virtue itself, on the nature of charity. So you have this false approach to economics now leading to a false understanding of charity and virtue. And it then becomes that spiritual sickness that's at the heart of a lot of what we were talking about this evening.
Right. And if they think that Marxists are going to bring about their utopia where children are cherished, it's like they need to look up how many people were gunned down, talking about gun violence, right? By Soviets, by Maoists. Like, they probably ought to look that one up, because some of them are avowed Marxists, right? Some in the Democrat Party certainly are what they embrace leads to violence, frankly.
Right. And as I said before on this program, I heard once Marxism described this way, that the Marxists say that you will be mercifully housed, and you will be mercifully fed, and you will be mercifully clothed. And if you resist, you will be mercifully shot. And that's really where we are.
I think so. I mean, I think that that's kind of the whole point of, a one world where, the people who know better, the oligarchs, the global bureaucrats that know better than you, can tell you how to live, and then, take care of things when you resist. And that's it's sad to see the church being so, again, if I'm being kind, I would say duped, right, into going along with this. But it seems as though there are actors in the church that are wholeheartedly cheerleading it. I don't know, again, if that's because they believe it somehow dovetails with a sort of universal concept. Remember, Pope Francis uses the word brotherhood a lot. And certainly we're called to be a brotherhood of Christians in the universal church. But that's not how globalists use the idea of brotherhood. So when you use those terms, either you two don't mean them in the same way, and it's dangerous to use them that way because people might not understand which way you mean it, or you're totally, on board with what they mean by it when they say brotherhood. That's the problem. It's defining the terms. And that's something that a lot of people don't do very well. It seems like they, on purpose, perhaps, leave that kind of confusion out there about what their words mean.
I agree. And the headline at LifeSite News is this: Vatican official at Davos says the church is implementing the World Economic Forum agenda. This is a very disturbing article. I'm going to read you just a few portions of it. The opening line says this: a Vatican cleric attending the 2022 Davos Summit, a conference hosted by the World Economic Forum, which advances a pushing green agenda, open borders, and future pandemic management, has said that the Catholic Church is, quote, committed to the various issues considered at the forum. Now, you can read all kinds of stuff about the World Economic Forum on your own time. You don't need me to go over and rehash what LifeSite News wrote. But what's very disturbing about this is the idea that the Catholic Church is getting involved in the World Economic Forum, which talked about this great reset. It talked about resetting the entire economy and resetting
the way governance works throughout the world. Klaus Schwab, who is an absolute committed Marxist, by the way, if you haven't seen the video, there's an interview of Klaus Schwab, and right over his shoulder is a picture of Vladimir Lenin. So this guy is a committed communist. He's not, he's a billionaire, a bazillionaire. He's heading the rich oligarch club of the World Economic Forum, but really it's just the Marxist. It's two sides of the Marxist coin: the World Economic Forum, and then you've got the World Social Forum, which we've also reported on. On the other side, the World Social Forum was created ostensibly to combat the World Economic Forum, but they're both committed to the same thing. The World Economic Forum said, we want a great reset. And the World Social Forum said, we should have a world social transformation, which kind of means the same thing. And in fact, I read through their talking points, and their talking points are very similar. And then you get the fact that the Vatican is playing both ends. The Vatican's very much involved with the World Social Forum. And now we find the Vatican's very much involved with the World Economic Forum. And you add to that the fact that the Vatican, in 2014, Pope Francis fully committed the Catholic Church to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, all of which are the same. You start looking at what all of these groups want, and it's all the same. They want to reduce the human carbon footprint, which means less industry. They want us all to be sequestered to these little farmlands where we are sustainable. So you and I will be given a little farm community where we can grow our crops. What's going to happen if you give everybody in the world what they deem to be a fair lot for you to raise and grow your own crops so that you can be a self-sustaining household? What's going to happen?
You're going to have worldwide shortages of everything.
Yep.
Because you're not respecting the natural thing that, like, not everybody's a farmer. Not everybody knows how to grow. Some people will grow crops better than others. Some people will thrive while others starve. Even if they all have the same thing, they don't all have the same brains, the same talent. Even if you give them the same resources, they don't know how to use the resources the same.
They don't even have the same soil.
Right. They don't even have the same soil. But I mean, again, if we're all growing corn, that's what everyone's going to eat. Like, there's not going to be any variety in the diet, because that's what allowing a free market, does. It allows people to specialize in the areas that they're good at, so that people can have shoes. What happened to the shoemakers? Like, we need people who can make clothing, who need to spend their entire day working on what they're good at. If they're not good at growing corn, I'd rather have shoes instead of having like millions of pounds of corn to eat all the time. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we still need people to work in industries that make things that benefit us. I mean, that's the way it's supposed, that's the way the free market is supposed to work. I mean, that's great. If you want to like redivide all the land, again, I don't know how you can do that in any way of justice, respecting property laws or anything like that. But you're right. Not everybody's going to have the same water rights.
Yep.
Not everyone's going to have the same soil, climate, etc. And you're disrespecting people's ability to freely choose where they can use their talents in the best way that they can to glorify God, by just saying, nope, you're living here, you're doing this.
Well, and even the Amish aren't completely and totally self-sufficient in their own right either. A lot of people point to the Amish and say, oh, but they're able to have their sustainable communities. Sure. But where do they get their cloth? Where do they get their leather for their shoes? Where do they get the rubber?
And they sell what they make too. They have Amish stores. They sell their furniture, their quilts, their jams, whatever. Like, they sell their stuff. So they clearly are participants in a free market society. They're not like some isolated village that they don't interact ever with the outside world. That's not true.
Right. Yep. And
they just have a peculiar way of life in terms of modernity and technology, but they are part of the market.
Yes. And therein lies the crux of the problem. People aren't seeing the larger issue from an economic standpoint. They're not understanding that in order to get clothing, you have to grow cotton. And to get that cotton to become a thread, you have to have a spindle, and you have to have all of the accoutrements that go into making thread. In order to make silk, you have to have a silk farm with all the silkworms and all the stuff that goes there too. everything that goes into making clothing, the dyes, the cloth, the fabric, the material, the textiles, everything that goes into making clothing comes from different sources, and you have to have it assembled in a particular area where all they're doing is taking all the raw materials and making it into a product that is then sold to tailors who can then make it into clothing. You know, all of the different trades that exist in society do so because, as you pointed out, some people are better at some things than others. And that's how we have an interworking society. But what this World Economic Forum thing seems to want to do is throw a monkey wrench in all of that and make everybody flat equal on everything, where you're making your own clothes and you're making your own shoes and you're making your own furniture and you're making your own food. Well, that sounds great, but I don't have an army to do those things with yet.
No, and it's horribly inefficient. I mean, this has already been shown. I mean, this was kind of, you know, that we could talk about. I know we're running out low on time here, but I mean, like the Industrial Revolution had a lot of bad things about it, certainly like the factories and people getting injured and the pollution and all that. But what it taught the world was that if you can introduce a mechanization process, that you can make your work more efficient, right? Yep. So that everybody can have more time to pursue the good, true, and the beautiful, and not just like from sun up to sundown work like a slave. And I think that that's a piece that people miss a lot when they talk about sustainable development. It's like we've been given a lot of gifts through people, you know, quite frankly, entrepreneurs who look at things through the eye for increasing the efficiency of the system. And again, in a way that should be consistent with human dignity, of course, and the popes are right, you know, to call out for that, like to have workers be protected and all that sort of thing, workplace safety. But to ignore the great gift we've been given in our modern times, I think is wrong. Like, I think that, again, there's this sort of either or trade-off. Like, you're not pro-life if you're pro-guns, you know, like you can't be both, right? Like it's one or the other. If you're pro-life, then you're anti-gun. So it's like you can't be pro-humanity, right? Unless you are pro-sustainable development goals. Like you can't be for the free market. These are somehow in opposition to each other. Right. That's what it just feels like sometimes, like they're creating this dichotomy where you have to pick a side. You can't be both. And I think that that's wrong. And again, I think it's dangerous for the church to be playing footsie with this sort of ideology, because we've already had history tell us where Marxism leads. It leads to massive body counts. If they're against gun control violence, they might want to think about who they're cozying up to, because that's where these ideologies go ultimately.
Well, and then that becomes the next question. If they control the guns in the hands of the citizens, who has them? And if the oligarchs are the ones with the guns and we're the ones at the end of the barrel, then I guess we will then become the slave society that does their bidding.
Right. But again, a slave society doesn't innovate. A slave society doesn't create. It doesn't make things that makes all boats rise. Like you can, right. Again, if you're an oligarch, you can only have so many, you know, houses, you know, clothing, shoes, cars, fast women, whatever. Like, you know, you can only have so much of that. You know, what do you want? Like a free society innovates, it creates, it thinks up things that people haven't thought of before. Like I said, it's very dangerous to go down this road. We've already seen where it leads before in the 20th century. It's not a good road to be on.
Well, there's a reason why in communist Russia and in communist China, the number one industry that they have is their spy technology. They right. go into the free market countries and they steal what they come up with and they try to replicate it, most of the time poorly, because they do shoddy work when they're trying to replicate these things. But most of their technology is all stolen technology. They did not come up with any of these things on their own.
No, because an enslaved population is not supposed to think.
Right.
You know, you're supposed to obey, and not in the Christian understanding of obedience either, right? You know, right. It goes well beyond that. So, yeah, that's a big problem.
So it seems to me that what the Vatican is trying to do now, by signing on to all three of these agendas, the Sustainable Development Goals, the World Economic Forum, and the World Social Forum, that they are signaling to the world that we're no longer interested in spiritual matters. We're more interested in material matters and a material utopian society. Your final thoughts?
Yes, it does seem like Christ is, talk about Christ being marginalized a little bit here, that it's almost as though Christ doesn't matter or he's just some banner to rally under, but that the freedom that Christ offers is freedom from sin. And that you get the impression that seems to be less important, than when looking at human misery. And again, it's fine for the church. The church has always been involved in charitable works, building orphanages, hospitals, etc. That's great. But to act as though her primary mission wasn't evangelization and the salvation of souls for eternity, to win souls for Christ, to act as though that was somehow second fiddle to, trying to relieve human suffering. Again, a very notable cause, but that's not what the church, that's not her primary mission. You have to
Right.
stay on mission, if you want to be successful. Seek ye first the kingdom and all the rest will be added unto you. And it seems like they kind of have forgotten that part.
Yep, they've inverted it. And of course, inverting the spiritual and the mundane is actually the sign of the satanic. So I guess there we are. And speaking of there we are, we're out of time. So why don't we go ahead and wrap up with our prayer? And as I said, next week we'll figure out exactly where we're going to be. I don't know if it's going to be live or if it's going to be pre-recorded, whatever the case may be. There will be a show, but you'll have to see at the time what the deal is. I'll let you know in the show if it's pre-recorded or if it's live. And why don't we go ahead and close with our prayer? In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Our Lady of Victory.
Pray for us.
In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right, everybody. I hope you have a great weekend, and in some capacity, you will see me next week. God bless you all.